Deep in the rugged wilderness of Montana Territory, 1887, where the wind carved stories into ancient rock formations and coyotes sang their lonely hymns to the moon, there lived a man who thought he'd found peace at last. Samuel Hartwell had purchased the abandoned Broken Arrow Ranch site unseen, seeking solitude after losing everything he held dear in the Great Chicago Fire. The weathered deed spoke of 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, but what it didn't mention was the mystery that would soon consume his every waking moment. The ranch house stood like a monument to forgotten dreams, its wooden walls scarred by years of harsh weather and neglect. Samuel arrived on a bitter October morning, his wagon loaded with supplies and his heart heavy with memories he desperately wanted to leave behind. The previous owner, a man named Jeremiah Cross, had simply vanished one day, leaving behind only questions and a property that locals whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. As Samuel unloaded his belongings, he noticed something peculiar about the surrounding forest. The trees seemed to lean inward toward the house, as if listening to secrets that only the wind could carry. Strange markings scarred the bark of ancient oaks, symbols that looked almost like crude letters but made no sense to his educated eye. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creak of old wood settling and the distant call of a hawk circling high above. His first night in the ranch house passed without incident, though Samuel found sleep elusive. The walls seemed to whisper with every gust of wind, and more than once he could have sworn he heard footsteps on the wooden porch outside. When morning came, he discovered tracks in the dirt around his property, tracks that looked human but were accompanied by paw prints far too large to belong to any domestic animal. For 3 days, Samuel worked tirelessly to make the ranch habitable. He repaired broken fence posts, cleared debris from the barn, and organized his sparse belongings in the main house. The work kept his mind occupied, but as evening fell on the 3rd day, something happened that would change the course of his life forever. He was chopping firewood behind the house when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold and his axe freeze mid-swing. It was singing, but not like any human voice he'd ever heard. The melody was wild and haunting, rising and falling like the howl of wind through canyon walls. Yet there were words, fragmented and strange, carried on the autumn air. Samuel followed the sound deeper into the forest than he'd ventured before, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The singing grew stronger as he pushed through thick underbrush, branches catching at his clothes and boots sinking into soft earth covered with fallen leaves. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him uncomfortably of flames. Then he saw her. In a small clearing, surrounded by a circle of massive wolves, sat a child who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Her hair was long and tangled, the color of autumn wheat, and her clothes were little more than animal skins sewn together with sinew. She sat cross-legged in the center of the wolf pack, her small hands moving gracefully as she sang in a language that sounded like no dialect Samuel had ever encountered. The wolves, 7 magnificent creatures with eyes like liquid amber, watched him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. They didn't growl or bare their teeth, but Samuel could feel their power, their readiness to protect the strange child who sat among them as naturally as if she belonged there. The girl's song came to an end, and she turned to look directly at Samuel with eyes that were startlingly blue against her sun-darkened skin. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried clearly across the clearing. "You're the new man at the broken place," she said, and her English, though accented with something wild and unfamiliar, was perfectly clear. Samuel's mouth went dry. "Who are you, child? Where are your parents?" The girl tilted her head, studying him with the same intense focus as the wolves around her. "I am Kaya," she said simply. "The wolves are my family now. The broken place was my home before, when the bad men came." "Bad men?" Samuel took a careful step forward, mindful of the watching wolves. "What bad men?" Kaya's expression darkened, and the largest wolf, a massive gray male with scars across his muzzle, moved closer to her side. "The men who hurt Papa Cross. The men who took the gold and made the blood flow like water." Samuel's mind raced. Jeremiah Cross, the previous owner, had disappeared without explanation. Local authorities had found no trace of foul play, but the man's sudden vanishing had always struck Samuel as suspicious. "Child, are you saying that Mr. Cross was killed?" The girl nodded solemnly. "3 bad men came in the night. They knew about Papa Cross's secret, about the gold he found in the deep places beneath the earth. They hurt him until he told them where it was hidden, and then they made him silent forever." A chill ran down Samuel's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "And you saw this happen?" "I was sleeping in the barn," Kaya whispered, her small voice trembling with remembered terror. "Papa Cross told me to hide there when strangers came, because some people don't understand about me and the wolves. I watched through the boards as they hurt him. I wanted to help, but he looked at me and shook his head, telling me with his eyes to stay hidden." The story was becoming clearer and more horrifying with each word. "How did you survive out here alone?" Kaya smiled, and for the first time, Samuel saw the wild innocence that still lived in her despite the horrors she'd witnessed. "The wolves found me the next morning, crying over Papa Cross's grave. They knew I had nowhere to go. The big one here, I call him Thunder, he brought me food. The mother wolves taught me which plants I could eat, which water was safe to drink. They became my pack." Samuel studied the remarkable scene before him, trying to process what he was hearing. A child living wild in the forest, raised by wolves, witness to a murder that the world believed never happened. It sounded like something from a Penny Dreadful novel, yet here was the evidence before his own eyes. "How long ago did this happen?" he asked gently. 2 winters, Kaya replied. 2 cold times when the wolves and I had to dig deep dens in the earth to stay warm. 2 years. This child had survived 2 brutal Montana winters living wild with a wolf pack, and from her appearance, she'd not just survived but thrived. Her skin was healthy despite its weathered appearance, her eyes bright and alert, her movements fluid and confident. Thunder, the massive gray wolf, suddenly lifted his head and growled low in his throat. The other wolves immediately came to attention, their ears pricked forward and their bodies tense. Kaya placed a gentle hand on Thunder's neck and listened intently to sounds Samuel couldn't hear. "Men coming," she whispered urgently. 3 men on horses moving fast through the trees. They carry the metal that kills from far away. Samuel strained his ears and finally caught the distant sound of hoofbeats pounding against hard earth. His blood chilled as he realized what this might mean. "The same men who killed Mr. Cross?" Kaya nodded, her face pale with fear. "They come back sometimes, looking for more gold, making sure no one knows their secret. They must have seen the smoke from your fire, known someone lives at the broken place again." The hoofbeats were growing louder, accompanied now by the sound of men's voices shouting to each other across the forest. Samuel made a decision that would have seemed impossible just minutes earlier. "Come with me, child. We'll go to the ranch house. I have weapons there and we can defend ourselves." But Kaya shook her head. "They know all the hiding places at the broken place. Papa Cross showed them everything before they killed him. But I know where they'll never find us." She stood gracefully, and the wolves rose with her as if responding to an unspoken command. "Follow Thunder," she said to Samuel. "Keep quiet and step where he steps. The wolves will protect us." Samuel had perhaps 30 seconds to decide whether to trust his fate to a wild child and her pack of wolves, or to return to his ranch house and face 3 armed killers alone. When he heard the first rifle shot echo through the trees, followed by cruel laughter, his decision was made. Thunder led them deeper into the forest, along paths that seemed invisible to Samuel's eyes but were clearly well known to the wolves. The child moved like liquid shadow between the trees, making no sound, disturbing not a single branch or leaf. Samuel did his best to follow, though he felt clumsy and loud compared to his strange guides. They climbed steadily upward, following what seemed to be an ancient game trail that wound between massive boulders and stands of pine trees so thick they blocked out most of the remaining daylight. Samuel's lungs burned with the effort, but fear kept him moving. Behind them, he could hear the 3 riders spreading out, calling to each other as they searched. "Jake, you check the barn," one voice shouted. "Bill, take the house. I'll scout the perimeter." "If that fool's here, we'll find him," came the reply. "Can't have witnesses. Not when we're this close to getting the rest of Cross's gold." Samuel's heart pounded as he realized how narrowly he'd escaped. If he'd been at the ranch house when the killers arrived, he would already be dead. Kaya had saved his life with her warning. They climbed for what felt like hours, though it was probably less than one. Finally, thunder stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall of rock rising from the mountainside. But as Samuel watched in amazement, the great wolf squeezed through what looked like nothing more than a shadow between two massive stones. "The secret place," Kaya whispered, taking Samuel's hand with surprising gentleness. "Papa Cross found it when he was looking for gold. It goes deep into the mountain, deeper than anyone could follow." Following Kaya through the narrow opening was like being born into another world. The passage widened almost immediately into a vast cavern lit by shafts of moonlight filtering through cracks high above. The floor was smooth stone, worn by countless years of water and weather, and along the walls Samuel could see the glint of something that made his breath catch in his throat. Gold. Veins of pure gold running through the rock like frozen lightning. More wealth than Samuel had ever imagined in his wildest dreams. This was what Jeremiah Cross had discovered, what had cost him his life, what 3 killers would do anything to possess. "Papa Cross brought me here once," Kaya said softly, her voice echoing in the vast space. "He said the mountain wanted to share its treasures, but only with people who understood that some things are more valuable than gold." The wolves spread out across the cavern floor, settling into what were obviously familiar resting spots. This wasn't just a hiding place, Samuel realized. It was their home, their sanctuary from a world that would never understand or accept their unusual family. "The bad men," Samuel said carefully. "Do you know their names?" Kaya nodded. "Jake Morrison, Bill Hendricks, and their leader, a man they call Dutch. Dutch Vanderberg. Papa Cross knew them from before, from the old mining days. They were partners once, but Dutch got greedy and dangerous." Samuel recognized the names. Morrison and Hendricks were small-time criminals known to law enforcement throughout the territory, but Dutch Vanderberg was something else entirely. A former cavalry officer turned outlaw, he was wanted for robbery, murder, and worse across 3 states. If Vanderberg was behind Cross's death, it explained why the man had simply vanished without a trace. "They've been coming back to look for more gold," Kaya continued. "Every few months, when the moon is dark, they dig in places Papa Cross showed them, but they never find the real treasure. This place, the secret cave, Papa Cross never told them about it." Samuel studied the child in the moonlight filtering down from above. "Kaya, do you know how much gold is in this mountain?" She shrugged with the casual indifference of someone who'd grown up with unimaginable wealth all around her. "Papa Cross said enough to buy 100 ranches like the Broken Place. But he also said gold makes men crazy, makes them forget what's really important." Thunder suddenly lifted his head and let out a long, low howl that echoed through the cavern like a warning bell. The other wolves immediately joined in, their voices blending into a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the mountain itself. "They're leaving," Kaya translated unnecessarily, as even Samuel could hear the sound of horses' hooves retreating through the forest below. "But they'll be back. They always come back." Samuel spent that night in the cave, sleeping fitfully on a bed of soft pine boughs that the wolves had somehow gathered. When he woke, Kaya was sitting by a small fire, cooking what appeared to be rabbit over the flames. She'd somehow managed to start the fire and catch their breakfast without waking him, a testament to the incredible skills she developed during her time with the wolf pack. "I've been thinking," Samuel said as they ate, "about those men, about what happened to Mr. Cross, about you living out here alone." Kaya waited patiently for him to continue, her blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "This can't go on forever," Samuel said gently. "You're still a child, no matter how capable you've become. You deserve a chance at a real life, at safety and education and all the things children should have." The girl's expression hardened. "The wolves are my family now. They would die before letting anyone hurt me." "I'm not talking about taking you away from the wolves," Samuel said quickly. "I'm talking about justice. Those men killed an innocent person and they're still free. They could kill again. And as long as they're out there, you'll never truly be safe. Kaya poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up toward the cavern ceiling. What are you saying? Samuel took a deep breath. I'm saying we go to the territorial marshal. We tell him what really happened to Jeremiah Cross. We make sure those killers face justice. And then what? Kaya's voice was barely above a whisper. What happens to me? They put me in one of those schools where they try to make children forget who they really are. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Samuel wasn't sure he was ready to face. He'd come to Montana seeking solitude, wanting nothing more than to heal from his own losses and live out his days in peace. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. What if I promised that wouldn't happen? He said slowly. What if I promised that no matter what, you'd always have a home at the Broken Arrow Ranch? You and the wolves both. Kaya stared at him for a long moment, and Samuel could see her weighing his words, testing them for sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Papa Cross used to say that sometimes the mountain sends exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Maybe you're the person the mountain sent for me. The journey down from the secret cave took most of the morning. Samuel had to stop frequently to rest, still unused to the altitude and the physical demands of mountain travel. Kaya moved effortlessly beside him, the wolves ranging ahead and behind like a natural guard force. When they reached the ranch house, Samuel was relieved to see that the killers had done little damage. A few windows were broken, some furniture overturned, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. More importantly, they'd found no evidence that he was anything more than what he appeared to be. A solitary man seeking a quiet life on an abandoned ranch. They'll be back, Kaya said again, as if reading his thoughts. Samuel nodded grimly. Then we'd better be ready for them. The nearest town with a territorial marshal was Cedar Falls, a 2-day ride through dangerous country. Samuel spent the afternoon preparing for the journey, loading his wagon with supplies and checking his weapons. Kaya watched everything he did with intense curiosity, asking questions about the outside world that broke Samuel's heart with their innocence. Are there many people in Cedar Falls? She asked. A few hundred, Samuel replied. More than you've probably ever seen in one place. Kaya nodded thoughtfully. Will they be afraid of the wolves? That was a question Samuel had been dreading. Probably, he admitted. Most people don't understand that wolves can be friends instead of enemies. Then the wolves will stay hidden in the forest, Kaya decided. Thunder and the others are very good at staying hidden when they need to. They set out for Cedar Falls the next morning, Samuel driving the wagon while Kaya sat beside him, her eyes wide with wonder at every new sight. True to her word, the wolves remained invisible, though Samuel occasionally caught glimpses of gray shapes moving through the trees beside the trail. The first day passed without incident, but as they made camp that evening beside a small stream, Samuel noticed that Thunder had emerged from the forest and was pacing restlessly at the edge of their campfire's light. What's troubling him? Samuel asked. Kaya tilted her head, listening to sounds Samuel couldn't detect. He smells the bad men. They're following us, but staying far behind. They want to know where we're going. Samuel's blood chilled. If Dutch Vanderberg and his men followed them to Cedar Falls, they could easily arrange an ambush on the return journey. Worse, they might decide to silence potential witnesses permanently, which would put the townspeople in danger. How far behind? Samuel asked. Kaya conferred with Thunder in a series of soft sounds that were half words, half growls. Half a day, she reported. They're being careful not to get too close. Samuel made his decision. We're not going to Cedar Falls. Not yet. Then where? Back to the ranch. But we're taking a different route, one that will give us an advantage. Samuel had studied the territorial maps extensively before purchasing the ranch, and he remembered seeing references to an old mining trail that connected to the main road several miles west of his property. It would take them through rougher country, but it would also allow them to approach the ranch house from an unexpected direction. More importantly, it would take them through a narrow canyon where 3 men on horseback would be extremely vulnerable to attack from above. They broke camp before dawn, Samuel pushing the horses hard along the barely visible mining trail. Kaya rode beside him in tense silence, while the wolves ranged far ahead, scouting for danger and reporting back through their mysterious communication with the girl. By midday, they'd reached the canyon Samuel remembered from the maps. It was perfect for his purposes, a narrow defile between high rock walls, with no way around and only one way through. Anyone following the trail would have to pass through this bottleneck, and Samuel intended to be waiting for them. "Can you and Thunder get up on those rocks?" Samuel asked, pointing to a ledge about 30 feet above the canyon floor. Kaya studied the cliff face with an experienced eye. "Yes. What do you want us to do?" Samuel outlined his plan, and Kaya's eyes widened with something that might have been admiration. It was dangerous, requiring precise timing and no small amount of luck, but it was their best chance to end the threat permanently. They spent the afternoon preparing. Samuel positioned his wagon to block the narrow passage, creating an obstacle that would force the pursuing riders to slow down. He placed his rifle in a carefully chosen spot behind a large boulder, with clear lines of sight in both directions. Kaya and Thunder climbed to their position on the ledge above, accompanied by 2 of the other wolves. Then they waited. The sun was setting when they finally heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Samuel checked his rifle one final time and took his position behind the boulder. High above, he could see Kaya crouched beside Thunder, both of them invisible against the darkening rock. Dutch Vanderberg appeared first, riding a magnificent black stallion and carrying a rifle across his saddle. He was exactly as Samuel had imagined him, tall, lean, with the bearing of a military man and the cold eyes of a killer. Behind him came Morrison and Hendricks, both looking nervous and constantly scanning the canyon walls above. "Hold up," Dutch called when he spotted the wagon blocking the trail. "Something ain't right here." The 3 men reined in their horses about 50 yards from Samuel's position, well within rifle range but not close enough for conversation. Dutch studied the abandoned wagon with the calculating gaze of a professional predator. "You think it's a trap?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "Everything's a trap," Dutch replied. "Question is, who's setting it and why?" Samuel took careful aim, but before he could fire, Thunder's howl echoed through the canyon like the voice of an avenging spirit. The sound was immediately taken up by the other wolves, creating a chorus of wild voices that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. The horses panicked immediately. Morrison's mount reared and threw him heavily to the ground, while Hendricks fought to control his terrified animal. Only Dutch managed to keep his seat, though his stallion danced nervously and rolled its eyes at the supernatural sounds echoing from above. "Wolves," Dutch snarled. "Big pack, from the sound of it." "Boss, maybe we should," Hendricks began. "We should finish what we came to do," Dutch interrupted. "That girl and whoever's protecting her are the only witnesses to what happened to Cross. Once they're dead, we can take our time getting the rest of that gold." Samuel's finger tightened on his rifle trigger, but Kaya's voice stopped him cold. The girl stood up on the ledge above, fully visible in the dying light, her wild hair flowing behind her like a banner. "You killed Papa Cross," she called down, her young voice carrying clearly despite the distance. "You hurt him until he told you about the gold, and then you killed him anyway." Dutch's face went white as he stared up at the impossible sight of the child he thought was long dead. "You," he whispered, and Samuel could hear the fear in his voice. "You're supposed to be dead. We searched everywhere." "The wolves protected me," Kaya replied simply. "They taught me how to survive, how to hide, how to remember everything I saw that night." Morrison had managed to get back on his feet and catch his horse, but his face was pale with terror as he stared up at the girl. "Boss, she's like some kind of ghost or something. How's she been living out here all this time?" "Shut up and get ready to shoot," Dutch snapped, raising his rifle. "Ghost or not, a bullet will put her down permanent." That was when Thunder made his move. The great gray wolf launched himself from the ledge with impossible grace, 150 pounds of muscle and fury descending like a missile toward the man who threatened his adopted daughter. Dutch's rifle roared, but his terrified horse had chosen that moment to bolt sideways, throwing off his aim completely. Thunder struck Dutch in the chest with the force of a cannonball, driving the man from his saddle and sending them both crashing to the rocky ground. The wolf's jaws closed around Dutch's gun arm with a sound like breaking branches, and the killer's rifle went spinning away into the gathering darkness. Morrison and Hendricks tried to bring their weapons to bear, but the other wolves had descended from their hiding places among the rocks, moving like gray shadows through the canyon. Samuel added his rifle to the chaos, his first shot taking Morrison in the shoulder and spinning him around. Hendricks, seeing his companions down and surrounded by snarling wolves, threw his rifle aside and raised his hands in surrender. "Don't kill me," he screamed. "It was Dutch's idea. All of it." The battle was over in less than a minute. Dutch lay unconscious beneath Thunder's watchful guard, his arm broken and bleeding, but his throat intact. The wolf had shown remarkable restraint for such a powerful predator. Morrison was sitting against a rock wall, clutching his wounded shoulder and whimpering. Only Hendricks remained upright, his hands high above his head and his face white with terror. Samuel emerged from his hiding place, keeping his rifle trained on the surviving outlaws. Kaya climbed down from the ledge with the fluid grace of someone raised by wolves, and Thunder padded over to stand protectively beside her. "It's over," Samuel said, though he kept his weapon ready. "Dutch Vanderberg, you're under arrest for the murder of Jeremiah Cross." Dutch stirred and opened his eyes, glaring up at Samuel with pure hatred. "You got no proof of anything," he snarled. "It's just the word of a wild girl against 3 law-abiding citizens." Kaya stepped forward, her young face set with determination. "I have proof," she said quietly. "Papa Cross knew you might try to kill him for his gold. He wrote down everything that happened between you, every conversation, every threat. He hid it where you'd never think to look." Samuel stared at the girl in amazement. "You never mentioned any written evidence." Kaya smiled, and for a moment she looked like any normal 12-year-old with a secret. "Papa Cross taught me that the most important truths should be saved for the most important moments. He said that someday, the right person would come along to help me make sure justice was done." The evidence was hidden in Jeremiah Cross's grave, sealed in an oilskin pouch and buried with the man's body. Cross had been more careful and more paranoid than his killers had realized, and his written account of Dutch's threats and demands for information about the gold mine would be more than enough to see all 3 men hang. 3 days later, Samuel and Kaya rode into Cedar Falls with their prisoners bound securely in the back of the wagon. The territorial marshal, a grizzled veteran named Tom Bradley, listened to their story with growing amazement and examined Cross's evidence with the eye of a man who'd seen his share of frontier justice. "This is ironclad," Bradley declared. "Dutch Vanderberg and his associates are going to face a judge and jury, and I suspect they'll all be taking a long drop from a short rope before the month is out." The trial was swift and decisive. Hendricks, facing the gallows alongside his partners, agreed to testify against Dutch in exchange for a life sentence. His testimony, combined with Cross's written evidence and Kaya's eyewitness account, left no doubt about what had happened that terrible night 2 years earlier. Dutch Vanderberg and Jake Morrison were hanged on a cold morning in November, their bodies buried in unmarked graves outside of town. Bill Hendricks was sentenced to life in the territorial prison, where he would spend the rest of his days contemplating the cost of greed and murder. Samuel and Kaya returned to the Broken Arrow Ranch as winter settled over the Montana landscape. The wolves had remained hidden in the forest during their absence, but Thunder emerged to greet Kaya as soon as their wagon came within sight of the ranch house. "What happens now?" Kaya asked as they sat by the fireplace that first evening back home. Samuel had been thinking about that question for weeks. "Now you get to decide who you want to be," he said. "You can stay wild and free with the wolves, or you can learn to live in the civilized world, or you can find some way to be both. It's your choice." Kaya was quiet for a long time, staring into the dancing flames. "Papa Cross used to say that the best people are the ones who can walk between 2 worlds, she said finally. "Maybe I can learn to do that." Over the months that followed, Samuel watched in amazement as Kaya gradually adapted to life at the ranch while maintaining her deep connection to the wolf pack. She learned to read and write with startling speed, devoured every book Samuel could provide, and showed a natural aptitude for mathematics and science that would have impressed any teacher. But she also spent hours each day running with the wolves through the forest, communicating with them in their own language, and serving as a bridge between the human and animal worlds in ways that seemed almost magical. The gold mine remained their secret. Samuel filed the proper claims and began extracting modest amounts of ore, enough to ensure their financial security without attracting unwanted attention. The bulk of the treasure remained hidden in the mountain cave, guarded by wolves and waiting for a future when its wealth might serve some greater purpose. Years passed. Kaya grew into a remarkable young woman, equally at home in the finest houses of Cedar Falls or running wild through the mountains with her wolf family. She became something of a legend in the territory, the girl who could speak to wolves and who had helped bring justice to one of the most notorious outlaws in the American West. Samuel never regretted his decision to trust a wild child and her pack of wolves. In trying to save Kaya, he had found his own redemption, discovering that sometimes the most broken places can become the foundation for something beautiful and strong. The Broken Arrow Ranch prospered under their care, becoming known throughout the region as a place where the impossible seemed perfectly natural, where wolves ran alongside cattle, and where a man could find peace even in the wildest corners of the frontier. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon was full, travelers passing through the valley would hear a sound that made their blood sing with ancient memories, the voice of a young woman raised in harmony with her wolf pack, singing songs that spoke of family, loyalty, and the enduring power of love to overcome even the darkest of human evils. The old ranch was no longer broken, and neither were the people who called it home.